contemporary actualities in the environment cannot be exaggerated. It is only by reason of the fortunate dependence of the experience and of these contemporary actualities on a common past, that presentational immediacy is more than a barren aesthetic display. It does display something, namely, the real extensiveness of the contemporary world. It involves the contemporary actualities but only objectifies them as conditioned by extensive relations. It displays a system pervading the world, a world including and transcending the experience. It is a vivid display of systematic real potentiality, inclusive of the experience and reaching beyond it. Insofar as straight lines can only be defined in terms of measurements, requiring particular actual occasions for their performance, the theory of geometry lacks the requisite disengagement from particular physical fact. The requisite geometrical forms can then only be introduced after examination of the particular actual occasions required for measurement. But the theory of projection, explained above, requires that the definition of a complete straight line be logically prior to the particular actualities in the extensive environment. This requisite has been supplied by the preceding theory of straight lines ch. Myth, the projectors do depend upon the one experient occasion. But even this dependence merely requires that component feelings of that occasion should participate in certain geometric elements, namely, a set of points, and the straight lines defined by them, among their data. Thus, according to this explanation, presentational immediacy is the mode in which vivid feelings of contemporary geometrical relations, with a special emphasis on certain, focal, regions, enter into experience. This doctrine is what common sense always assumes. When we see a colored shape, it may be a real man, or a ghost, or an image behind a mirror, or a hallucination, 495, but whatever it be, there it is exhibiting to us a certain region of external space. If we are gazing at a nebula, 1,000 light years away, we are not looking backward through 1,000 years. Such ways of speaking are interpretive phrases, diverting attention from the primary fact of direct experience, observing the illumination of a contemporary patch of the heavens. In philosophy, it is of the utmost importance to beware of the interpretive vagaries of language. Further, the extent of the patch illuminated will depend entirely upon the magnifying power of the telescope used. The correlation of the patch, thus seen through the telescope, with a smaller patch, defined by direct projection from the observer, is again a question of scientific interpretation. This smaller patch is what we are said to have seen, magnified, by the use of the telescope. What we do see is the bigger patch, and we correlate it with the smaller patch by theoretical calculation. The scientific explanation neglects the telescope and the larger patch really. Measurement 325 seen, and considers them as merely instrumental intermediaries. It concentrates on the contemporary smaller patch, and finally deserts even that patch in favor of another region 1,000 years in the past. This explanation is only one illustration of the way in which so-called statements of direct observation are, through and through, merely interpretive statements of simple direct experience. When we say that we have seen a man, we may mean that we have seen a patch which we believe to be a man. In this case, our total relevant experience may be more than that of bare sight. In Descartes' phraseology, our experience of the external world embraces not only an inspectio of the relatas objectiva in the pre-Henschens in question, but also a judicium, which calls into play the totality of our experience beyond those prehensions. The objection to this doctrine of presentational immediacy, that it presupposes a definition of straight lines, free from dependence on external actualities, has been removed by the production of such a definition in ch. IIL 496. Of course, the point of the definition is to demonstrate that the extensive continuum, apart from the particular actualities into which it is atomized, includes in its systematic structure the relationships of regions expressed by straight lines. These relationships are there for perception. Section 3. The Cartesian doctrine of the relatas objectiva, attaching to presentational immediacy, is entirely denied by the modern doctrine of private psychological fields. Locke's doctrine of secondary qualities is a halfway house to the modern position, and indeed so is Descartes' own position considered as a whole. Descartes' doctrine on this point is obscure, and is interpretable as according with that of the philosophy of organism. But Locke conceives the sensa as purely mental additions to the facts of physical nature. Both philosophers conceive the physical world as an essential independence of the mental world, though the two worlds have ill-defined accidental relationships. According to the philosophy of organism, physical and mental operations are inextricably intertwined. Also, we find the sense of functioning as forms participating in the vector prehensions of one occasion by another. And finally, in tracing the origin of presentational immediacy, we find mental operations transmuting the functions of sensa so as to transfer them from being participants in causal prehensions into participants in presentational prehensions. But throughout the whole story, the sensa are participating in nature as much as anything else. It is the function of mentality to modify the physical participation of eternal objects. The case of presentational prehensions is only one conspicuous example. The whole doctrine of mentality from the case of God downwards is that it is a modifying agency. But Descartes and Locke abandon the relatas objectiva, so far as sensa are concerned, but for Descartes, cf. Meditation it is certain all the same that the colors of 497 which 326. The theory of extension. This is composed are necessarily real, and hope to say that so far as extensive relations are concerned. This is an impossible compromise. It was easily swept aside by Berkeley and Hume. Cf. Inquiry, Sect. 12, Part 1. Hume, with obvious truth, refers to Berkeley as the originator of this train of argument. The modern doctrine of private psychological fields is the logical result of Hume's doctrine, though it is a result which Hume, as an agent, refused to accept. This modern doctrine raises a great difficulty in the interpretation of modern science. For all exact observation is made in these private psychological fields. It is then no use talking about instruments and laboratories and physical energy. What is really being observed are narrow bands of color sensa in the private psychological space of color vision. The impressions of sensation which collectively form this entirely private experience, arise in the soul from unknown causes. The spectroscope is a myth, the radiant energy is a myth, the observer's eye is a myth, the observer's brain is a myth, and the observer's record of his experiment on a sheet of paper is a myth. When, some months later, he reads his notes to a learned society, he has a new visual experience of black marks on a white background in a new private psychological field. And again, these experiences arise in his soul, from unknown causes. It is merely custom, which leads him to connect his earlier with his later experiences. All exact measurements are, on this theory, observations in such private psychological fields. Hume himself, as an agent, refused to accept this doctrine. The conclusion is that Hume's account of experience is unduly simplified. This is the conclusion adopted by the philosophy of organism. But one important fact does emerge from the discussion, that all exact measurements concern perceptions in the mode of presentational immediacy, and that such observations purely concern the systematic geometric forms of the environment, forms defined by projectors 498 from the C of the strain and irrespective of the actualities which constitute the environment. The contemporary actualities of the world are irrelevant to these observations. All scientific measurements merely concern the systematic real potentiality out of which these actualities arise. This is the meaning of the doctrine that physical science is solely concerned with the mathematical relations of the world. These mathematical relations belong to the systematic order of extensiveness which characterizes the cosmic epoch in which we live. The societies of enduring objects, electrons, protons, molecules, material bodies, at once sustain that order and arise out of it. The mathematical relations involved in presentational immediacy thus belong equally to the world perceived and to the nature of the percipient. They are, at the same time, public fact and private experience. The perceptive mode of presentational immediacy is in one sense barren. So far as apart from symbolic transference it discloses the measurement. 327. Temporary world. That world, thus objectified, is devoid of all elements constitutive of subjective form, elements emotional, appreciative, purposive. The bonds of the objectified nexus only exhibit the definiteness of mathematical relations. But in another sense this perceptive mode has overwhelming significance. It exhibits that complex of systematic mathematical relations which participate in all the nexus of our cosmic epoch, in the widest meaning of that term. These relations only characterize the epoch by reason of their foundation in the immediate experience of the society of occasions dominating that epoch. Thus we find a special application of the doctrine of the interaction between societies of occasions and the laws of nature. The perceptive mode in presentational immediacy is one of the defining characteristics of the societies which constitute the nexus termed material bodies. Also in some fainter intensity it belongs to the electromagnetic occasions in empty space. From the point of view of a 499 single experience, that mode discloses systematic relations which dominate the environment. But the environment is dominated by these relationships by reason of the experiences of the individual occasions constituting the societies. It is by reason of this disclosure of ultimate system that an intellectual comprehension of the physical universe is possible. There is a systematic framework permeating all relevant facts. By reference to this framework, the variant, various, vagrant, evanescent details of the abundant world can have their mutual relations exhibited by their correlation to the common terms of a universal system. Sounds differ qualitatively among themselves. Sounds differ qualitatively from colors. Colors differ qualitatively from the rhythmic throbs of emotion and of pain. Yet all alike are periodic and have their spatial relations and their wavelengths. The discovery of the true relevance of the mathematical relations disclosed in presentational immediacy was the first step in the intellectual conquest of nature. Accurate science was then born. Apart from these relations as facts in nature, such science is meaningless, a tale told by an idiot and credited by fools. For example, the conjecture by an eminent astronomer, based on measurements of photographic plates, that the period of the revolution of our galaxy of stars is about 300 million years can only derive its meaning from the systematic geometrical relations which permeate the epoch. But he would have required the same reference to system, if he had made an analogous statement about the period of revolution of a child's top. Also, the two periods are comparable in terms of the system. Section IV. Measurement depends upon counting and upon permanence. The question is, what is counted, and what is permanent? The things that are counted are the inches on a straight metal rod, a yard measure. Also the thing 500 that is permanent is this yard measure in respect both to its 328. The theory of extension. Internal relations and in respect to some of its extensive relations to the geometry of the world. In the first place, the rod is straight. Thus the measurement depends on the straightness and not the straightness upon the measurement. The modern answer to this statement is that the measurement is a comparison of infinitesimals, or of an approximation to infinitesimals. The answer to this answer is that there are no infinitesimals, and that therefore there can be no approximation to them. In mathematics, all phraseology about infinitesimals is merely disguised statement about a class of finites. This doctrine has been conclusive mathematical theory since the time of Weierstrass in the middle of the 19th century. Also, all the contortions of curvature are possible for a segment between any n tilde points. Of course, in all measurement there is approximation in our supposi tilde tions as to the yard tilde measure, but it is approximation to straightness. Also, having regard to the systematic geometry of straight lines, and to the type of approximation exhibited by the rod, the smaller the portion used, the more negligible are the percentage errors introduced by the defects from straightness. But unless the notion of straightness has a definite meaning in reference to the extensive relations, this whole procedure in practical measurement is meaningless. There is nothing to distinguish one contorted segment between n tilde points from another contorted segment between those n tilde points. One is no straighter than another. Also, any percentage differences between their lengths can exist. Again, the inches are counted because they are congruent and are n tilde on along the straight rod. No one counts coincident inches. The counting essentially is concerned with non-tilde coincident straight segments. The new tilde-numerical measure of length is the indication of the fact that the yard tilde measure is a straight rod divisible into 30-6 congruent inch tilde long segments. 501. There is a modern doctrine that congruence means the possibility of coincidence. If this be the case, then the importance of congruence would arise when the possibility is realized. Alternatively, the possibility could be of importance as a lure entering into the subjective aim. If the latter alternative were true, congruence would play its part in the form of a tendency of congruent bodies to coalesce, or to resist coalescence. In fact, there would be aversion to, or aversion from, T-coalescence. Of course the suggestion is fantastic. Recurring to the former alternative, the IM tilde portance of the 30-6 inches along the yard tilde measure depends on the fact that they are not coincident and, until the destruction of the rod, never will be coincident. There is a realized property of the rod that it is 30-6 inches in length. Thus although coincidence is used as a test of congruence, it is not the meaning of congruence. We must now consider the use of coincidence as a test. Congruence is tested either by the transference of a steel yard tilde measure from coincidence. Measurement 329. With one body to coincidence with another body, or by some optical means dependent on the use of an optical instrument and on the congruence of successive wavelengths in a train of waves, or by some other vibratory device dependent on analogous principles. It is at once evident that all these tests are dependent on a direct intuition of permanence. This permanence means permanence in respect to congruence for the various instruments employed, namely, the yard measure, or the optical instruments, or analogous instruments. For example, the yard measure is assumed to remain congruent to its previous self, as it is transferred from one setting to another setting. It is not sufficient to intuit that it remains the same body. Substances that are very deformable preserve that sort of self-identity. The required property is that of self-congruence. Minute variations of physical conditions will make the rod vary slightly, also sense perception is never absolutely exact. 502 But unless there be a meaning to exactitude, the notions of a slight variation, and of a slight defect from exactitude, are nonsense. Apart from such a meaning, the two occasions of the rod's existence are incomparable, except by another experiment depending upon the same principles. There can only be a finite number of such experiments, so ultimately we are reduced to these direct judgments. However far the testing of instruments and the corrections for changes of physical factors, such as temperature, are carried, there is always a final dependence upon direct intuitions that relevant circumstances are unchanged. Instruments are used from minute to minute, from hour to hour, and from day to day, with the sole guarantee of antecedent tests and of the appearance of invariability of relevant circumstances. This appearance is always a perception in the mode of presentational immediacy. If such perception be in any sense private, in contradistinction to a correlative meaning for the term el public, then the perceptions, on which scientific measurement depends, merely throw light upon the private psychology of the particular observer, and have no public import. Such a conclusion is so obviously inconsistent with our beliefs as to the intercommunication of real actualities in a public world, that it may be dismissed as a reductio ad absurdum, having regard to the groundwork of common experience which is the final test of all science and philosophy. A great deal of modern scientific philosophy consists in recurrence to the theory of privacy, when such statements seem to afford a shortcut to simplicity of statement, and on the other hand of employment of the notion of observing a public world when that concept is essential for expressing the status of science in common experience. Science is either an important statement of systematic theory correlating observations of a common world, or is the daydream of a solitary intelligence with a taste for the daydream of publication. But 503, it is not philosophy to vacillate from one point of view to the other. 330. The theory of extension. Section B. Finally, that meaning of L-congruence, as a relation between two geometrical elements in a strain locus must be considered. It will be sufficient to consider this meaning in reference to two segments of straight lines, and to treat all other meanings as derivative from this. A strain locus is defined by the L projectors which penetrate any one finite region within it. Such a locus is a systematic whole, independently of the actualities which may atomize it. In this it is to be distinguished from a L duration, which does depend on its physical content. A strain locus depends merely upon its geometrical content. This geometrical content is expressed by any adequate set of axioms from which the systematic interconnections to its included straight lines and points can be deduced. This conclusion requires the systematic uniformity of the geometry of a strain locus, but refers to further empirical observation for the discovery of the particular character of this uniform system. For example, the question as to whether a complete straight line via L closed serial locus of points or in lopen serial locus is entirely a question for such discovery. The only decision is to be found by comparing the rival theories in respect to their power of elucidating observed facts. The only relevant properties of straight lines are I. their completeness, E. their inclusion of points, E. their unique definition by any pair of included points, IV. their possibility of mutual intersection in a single point. The additional axioms which express THC systematic geometrical theory must not have reference to length or to congruence. For these notions are to be derived from the theory. Thus the axioms must have exclusive reference to the intersection of straight lines, and to their inclusion or exclusion of points indicated by the intersections of other lines. Such sets of axioms are 504J well known to mathematicians. There are many such sets which respectively constitute alternative geometrical theories. Also given one set of axioms constituting a definite geometrical theory, different sets of axioms can easily be obtained which are equivalent to each other in the sense that all the other sets can be deduced from any one of them. All such equivalent sets produce the same geometrical theory. Equivalent sets have their importance, but not for the present investigation. We can therefore neglect them, and different sets of axioms will mean sets of axioms which constitute incompatible geometrical theories. There are many such sets, with a great variety of peculiar properties. There are, however, 3 such sets which combine a peculiar simplicity with a very general confirmation to the observed facts. These sets give the non-metrical properties of the 3 geometrical theories respectively known to mathematicians as the theory of elliptic geometry, of Euclidean geometry, and of hyperbolic geometry. It will